Sometimes the change doesn't begin with a dramatic event. It begins with a feeling, a quiet sense that something is different, even if you can't explain why. Certain conversations stay with you longer than they should. Certain symbols seem to appear everywhere. A thought you've never had before keeps returning, and beneath the surface of ordinary life, you start feeling as though invisible threads are slowly weaving themselves into a pattern you were never meant to notice this early. What makes this unsettling is that nothing may appear different on the outside. Yet something inside you knows that the way you've been seeing reality is starting to shift. The strange part is that these moments rarely arrive with explanations. They arrive as clues, as coincidences, as questions that refuse to leave. And if you've been experiencing more of these lately, you may be standing at the edge of a transformation that began long before you became aware of it. The real mystery isn't why these connections are appearing now. The mystery is why they were hidden from you for so long. There comes a moment when life begins behaving differently. Not dramatically, not loudly, just differently enough that you can't ignore it. A conversation mentions something you've been thinking about in private. A book falls into your hands at exactly the right time. A symbol appears repeatedly across completely unrelated situations. At first, the mind dismisses these moments as coincidence, but eventually, coincidence begins accumulating faster than explanation. What's strange is that these connections rarely appear when life is stable and predictable. They tend to emerge during periods when something deeper is shifting beneath the surface. Long before conscious awareness catches up, another part of you seems to notice the change. It's as if reality starts whispering before it starts speaking. And those whispers often arrive disguised as ordinary events that somehow carry an unusual emotional weight. You may have experienced this yourself. Perhaps a certain topic keeps appearing everywhere you look. Different people, different places, different circumstances, yet the same message seems to be finding its way back to you. The rational mind searches for a logical cause. It wants a neat explanation. But what makes these experiences memorable isn't their logic. It's the feeling that accompanies them, the subtle sensation that something is trying to get your attention. Psychologically, this often marks the beginning of a profound internal reorganization. When deeper layers of the mind begin shifting, perception changes before understanding does. You start noticing things that were always present but previously invisible. Not because reality changed overnight, but because your relationship to reality is changing. The pattern was there before. What changed was your ability to see it. Ancient traditions often described this process as a form of awakening. Not awakening to a different world, but awakening to dimensions of the current one that usually remain hidden behind routine and habit. The clues don't appear because reality suddenly becomes meaningful. They appear because meaning is beginning to break through the walls of ordinary perception. The world starts feeling less like a collection of isolated events and more like a conversation happening beneath the surface. And yet, just as these connections begin forming, something unexpected usually happens. Instead of greater certainty, life often becomes more confusing. The pattern becomes stronger, but clarity becomes weaker. The pieces seem to be moving into place, while the picture itself becomes harder to recognize, which raises an unsettling question. Why does transformation so often begin by making everything feel less stable than before? Most people imagine transformation as a process of becoming more certain, more confident, more clear. What they rarely expect is the period that comes first. The strange season when old answers stop working but new answers haven't arrived yet. A season where life feels fragmented, unfinished, and strangely unpredictable. Yet this phase may be one of the most important signs that genuine change is already underway. Think about how often major turning points begin with disruption. Relationships shift unexpectedly. Long-held goals lose their emotional pull. Familiar routines start feeling empty. Even your thoughts may seem less reliable than before. It can feel as though something valuable is being lost. But what if the discomfort isn't evidence that something is going wrong? What if it's evidence that something deeper is reorganizing itself? The mind craves stability, It builds structures, identities, and stories that help make sense of reality. Over time, these structures become so familiar that we mistake them for reality itself. Yet growth rarely asks permission before it arrives. Sometimes it begins by exposing cracks in the very frameworks that once made us feel secure. Not to punish us, but to reveal limitations we could not see while standing inside them. This is why periods of uncertainty often feel so emotionally intense. You're not merely losing certainty. You're losing an old way of interpreting your life. The future becomes harder to predict because the lens you've used for years is gradually dissolving. Many people mistake this experience for failure. They assume they are lost. In truth, they may simply be between versions of themselves. There is a paradox hidden here. The deeper the transformation, the less control it initially appears to offer. Instead of gaining immediate clarity, you often experience temporary confusion. Instead of seeing the entire path, you see only fragments. Yet these fragments are not random. They are pieces of a larger reorganization happening beneath conscious awareness. Something is being rearranged before it can be understood. And during this phase, another subtle change begins taking place. Without realizing it, you start noticing things you never noticed before. Emotional signals become stronger. Intuition becomes harder to ignore. Certain moments seem to carry unusual significance. It is as though a new form of perception is slowly activating beneath the noise of uncertainty, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. At some point, something subtle begins to change in the way you experience reality. The world itself appears the same, yet your perception of it feels different. Conversations reveal meanings that once slipped past unnoticed. Small emotional reactions suddenly seem significant. Dreams linger in your mind long after waking. You find yourself paying attention to things that your previous self would have ignored completely. What's fascinating is that this shift rarely feels dramatic at first. It often arrives quietly. You simply begin noticing connections between experiences that once seemed unrelated. A feeling that appeared random now reveals a deeper cause. A recurring challenge starts exposing a pattern. Certain people trigger emotions that point towards something unresolved within you. Life stops appearing as a collection of separate events and starts behaving more like a living mirror. Psychologists have long observed that awareness doesn't merely reveal reality. It changes it. The moment you become conscious of a pattern, your relationship with that pattern transforms. What was unconscious begins moving into the light. And once seen clearly, it becomes impossible to experience it in exactly the same way again. This is one reason transformation can feel both exciting and unsettling. Every new insight quietly changes the landscape of your inner world. You may notice this happening through intuition. Not the dramatic kind often portrayed in stories, but the quiet knowing that appears before logic catches up. A sense that a decision is wrong even when it looks right on paper. A feeling that a path is opening before any visible evidence exists. These experiences challenge the part of us that wants certainty. Yet they often emerge precisely when our deeper intelligence is trying to guide us beyond familiar territory. Ancient traditions described this as seeing with new eyes. Not because new information suddenly appeared, but because perception itself expanded. The same reality that once seemed ordinary begins revealing layers that were always there. Symbolism appears where randomness once existed. Meaning emerges where emptiness once seemed to dominate. The hidden truth is that awareness does not create these layers. It simply allows you to recognize them. But expanded awareness comes with an unexpected consequence. The more clearly you see, the harder it becomes to believe certain things you once accepted without question. Ideas that once felt solid begin losing their certainty. Goals that once motivated you begin feeling strangely hollow. And before long, you find yourself facing a realization that many people spend their entire lives avoiding. Perhaps the version of reality you've been living inside is no longer large enough to contain who you are becoming. One of the most confusing moments in any transformation occurs when nothing is technically wrong, yet everything feels different. The career that once inspired you no longer carries the same energy. The ambitions that once drove you forward begin feeling distant. Even certain relationships seem connected to a version of you that no longer exists. This can be deeply unsettling because the external structures may remain unchanged while the internal meaning behind them quietly disappears. Most people assume that growth means adding something new. In reality, it often begins with subtraction. Old assumptions start falling away. Beliefs that once seemed unquestionable reveal their limitations. Stories you've told yourself for years suddenly stop making sense. The map you've been using to navigate life starts failing in places where it once worked perfectly, and for a while, you may not have a replacement. This stage can feel like standing between two worlds. One world is familiar, but increasingly lifeless. The other is unknown and impossible to fully understand. The temptation is to retreat into what is familiar, to force yourself back into old patterns, to pretend nothing has changed. Yet the strange thing about genuine transformation is that once awareness reaches a certain point, returning becomes more painful than moving forward. Psychologically, this happens because identity itself is being questioned. Not your name, your profession, or your social role, but the deeper assumptions about who you believe yourself to be. We all construct internal narratives that help organize our experience. Over time, those narratives become invisible. We stop seeing them as stories and start experiencing them as reality. Transformation begins when those stories can no longer explain what we are living through. This is why periods of awakening often involve grief. Not necessarily grief for people or circumstances, but grief for an older version of yourself. The person who viewed life through simpler categories. The person who believed certain answers would solve everything. The person who thought meaning could be found by following a predictable path. As that version dissolves, a strange emptiness appears. Yet hidden within that emptiness is possibility. And it is often precisely at this point, when the old framework has weakened and the new one has not fully emerged, that reality begins communicating through the most mysterious channel of all. Not through certainty, not through explanations, but through meaningful coincidences. There are moments that seem too precise to dismiss, yet too strange to explain. You think about someone you haven't spoken to in years, and they contact you the same day. A question has been weighing on your mind, and the answer appears unexpectedly through a stranger's comment, a book passage, or a conversation you weren't even meant to overhear. Individually, these moments can be explained away, but when they begin happening repeatedly, something inside you starts paying closer attention. What makes synchronicity so powerful isn't the event itself. It's the feeling attached to it. A sudden pause. A moment of recognition. The sensation that reality has briefly revealed a hidden layer of itself. Many people describe these experiences as if time momentarily folds in on itself, allowing an invisible connection between inner experience and outer events to become visible. The rational mind often struggles with this phenomenon because it prefers clear chains of cause and effect. Yet synchronicities seem to operate differently. They don't arrive as proof. They arrive as symbols. Their purpose is not necessarily to explain reality, but to make you notice it differently. They create questions that cannot be answered through, and those questions often become doorways into deeper awareness. Perhaps you've noticed recurring numbers appearing during important periods of your life. Or perhaps certain themes keep repeating through different people and situations. Maybe the same message arrives through completely unrelated sources within a short span of time. What's remarkable is not the specific content of these experiences. It's how often they appear during moments of transition, uncertainty, and transformation. Carl Jung observed that meaningful coincidences tend to emerge when something significant is happening within the psyche. It's as if the boundary between inner and outer reality becomes more permeable. Events that appear unrelated suddenly seem connected by meaning rather than by causality. Whether one interprets this psychologically, symbolically, or through a deeper mystery, the effect is often the same. You begin feeling that life is participating in a conversation you didn't realize was taking place. And once enough of these moments accumulate, another realization starts emerging. The synchronicities themselves may not be the transformation. They may be symptoms of it, signals that something beneath the surface is already moving. Because while you are busy noticing the signs, another process is quietly unfolding. A process that is not merely changing what you notice, but slowly rearranging the structure of your entire life. Transformation rarely announces itself with a formal introduction. More often, it reveals itself through subtle changes that only make sense in retrospect. People drift away without conflict. Interests that once consumed your attention lose their grip. New opportunities appear where none existed before. Entire directions begin shifting, not because you consciously planned them, but because something deeper seems to be guiding the movement. At first, these changes can feel random, even frustrating. You may wonder why certain relationships no longer carry the same energy, why familiar environments suddenly feel restrictive, why old ambitions seem disconnected from who you are becoming. The instinct is often to hold on tighter, to preserve what feels familiar. Yet transformation has a peculiar way of loosening attachments before revealing what comes next. One hidden truth many people discover too late is that growth is not only about gaining, it is also about releasing. Every new level of awareness creates tension with parts of life that were built around previous versions of yourself. This doesn't mean those parts were mistakes. They served a purpose. They brought lessons, experiences, and understanding. But not everything that was necessary for your past remains necessary for your future. You may have noticed this in your own life. Conversations that once felt engaging now seem repetitive. Goals that once felt urgent no longer inspire action. Certain habits become difficult to maintain, not because you're trying to change them, but because they no longer align with something shifting inside you. It's as though an invisible force is reorganizing your priorities from within, long before you consciously decide to do so. Many traditions have described this process using different language. Some speak of destiny. Others speak of alignment. Others speak of psychological integration. Yet all point toward a similar observation. When profound change occurs internally, external life often begins rearranging itself around that change. Not instantly, not perfectly, but gradually enough that the pattern only becomes obvious when looking back. The unsettling part is that this rearrangement eventually reaches a point where returning becomes impossible. Not because a door has been locked behind you, but because the person who once wanted to walk through that door no longer exists in quite the same way. And that realization marks the beginning of one of the deepest truths transformation has to offer. There is a moment in every genuine transformation that rarely gets discussed. It is not the moment when something new arrives. It is the moment when you realize something old is gone. Not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly enough that you almost miss it. One day you find yourself standing in a familiar situation, expecting the same reaction you've always had, only to discover that the reaction never comes. Perhaps it happens when you revisit an old dream that once consumed your thoughts, or when you return to a place that used to feel important. Maybe it's a conversation with someone who still sees you as the person you used to be. Whatever form it takes, the experience is strangely disorienting. You recognize the environment, but you no longer recognize yourself within it. The role still exists, yet something inside you refuses to step back into it. This is one of the hidden signs of transformation. We often imagine change as gaining knowledge, wisdom, or confidence. But some of the deepest changes are measured by what no longer controls us. Old fears lose their authority. Old insecurities stop dictating our choices. Old desires that once felt urgent begin fading into the background. The things that once defined you start feeling like clothes that no longer fit. What makes this difficult is that part of the mind longs for familiarity. Even painful familiarity can feel safer than uncertainty. There is comfort in known patterns, known identities, known struggles. Yet every attempt to return to them creates an unexpected kind of discomfort. You begin feeling trapped inside versions of yourself that no longer reflect your current reality. What once felt like home starts feeling strangely confined. Psychologically, this happens because awareness cannot truly be reversed. Once you have seen a deeper layer of yourself, pretending not to know it becomes exhausting. Once you recognize a pattern, you cannot fully unsee it. Once your perception expands, shrinking it back down requires constant effort. This is why many people feel caught between worlds during periods of transformation. The old world is too small, but the new one has not fully revealed itself yet. And this creates an unsettling question. If you cannot return to who you were, then who are you becoming? The answer rarely arrives through logic. Instead, it emerges through another realization that begins growing stronger with each passing day. The sense that the connections appearing throughout your life may not be random signs of change. They may be evidence of something far deeper, operating beneath the surface. Most people spend their lives assuming reality is a collection of separate events. One thing happens, then another. Causes produce effects. The story seems straightforward. Yet during periods of transformation, a different possibility begins to emerge. What if the events in your life are not as disconnected as they appear? What if there is a deeper pattern linking experiences that seem unrelated on the surface? This question has fascinated human beings for thousands of years. Ancient philosophers, mystics, psychologists, and explorers of consciousness all approached it from different directions. Yet many arrived at a surprisingly similar observation. Beneath the apparent randomness of life, there may exist an underlying order that reveals itself only when perception changes. Not an order that controls every detail, but one that quietly shapes the relationships between them. Think about moments when life seemed to guide you without explanation. A missed opportunity that later revealed itself as protection. An unexpected encounter that altered the course of your future. A painful ending that created space for something you could not have imagined beforehand. At the time, these events often felt confusing or even unfair. Yet looking back, they appear woven into a larger story that was impossible to see while living through it. The hidden truth is that meaning is often recognized backward. We tend to expect understanding before movement, but life frequently operates in reverse. The path unfolds first. Understanding arrives later. This is why periods of transformation can feel so mysterious. You are being asked to participate in a chapter whose significance will only become clear after it has already changed you. Some traditions describe this hidden order as universal intelligence. Others describe it as the unconscious mind expressing itself through symbols and experiences. Others avoid labels altogether and simply acknowledge that reality appears more interconnected than we normally assume. Whatever language is used, the experience remains remarkably similar. The feeling that life is not merely happening around you. It is responding to something happening within you. And if that possibility contains even a fragment of truth, then the strange connections you've been noticing may point towards something extraordinary. Not a future event waiting to arrive. Not a transformation that will happen someday, but a threshold that may already be beneath your feet, whether you fully recognize it yet or not. The final question is not whether change is coming. The final question is whether you are already standing inside it. There is a point in transformation where the question quietly changes. For a long time, you may have been asking, when will things change? But eventually another realization begins to emerge. What if the change has already begun? What if all the confusion, the coincidences, the emotional shifts, the strange sense that something important is happening, were never signs of a future transformation, but evidence of a present one? This threshold is easy to miss because it rarely feels dramatic. There is no clear line separating the old reality from the new one. Instead, you gradually notice that your relationship with life has changed. The same circumstances no longer produce the same reactions. The same fears no longer hold the same power. The same ambitions no longer define your sense of purpose. Something fundamental has shifted, even if you cannot fully describe it. Many people spend years waiting for certainty before they trust the process. Yet certainty often arrives last. First comes the discomfort, then the questions, then the unexpected patterns, then the feeling that reality is somehow speaking through experiences that once appeared meaningless. Only later do you recognize that these were not isolated events. They were markers along a path that had been unfolding all along. A deeper psychological insight is that transformation is rarely an event. It is a reorientation of perception. The world may look the same, but the observer is no longer the same. And because perception shapes experience, even familiar realities begin revealing new dimensions. You are not necessarily entering a different world. You are entering a different relationship with the world that has always been here. This explains why so many people describe transformation as both unsettling and strangely familiar. Part of you feels like a beginner stepping into unknown territory. Another part feels as though you are remembering something you always knew but somehow forgot. The connections, the synchronicities, the inner shifts, the dissolving of old identities all seem to point toward a truth that has been patiently waiting beneath the noise of everyday life. And perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all. Maybe the transformation was never about becoming someone else. Maybe it was about becoming aware of what was already emerging within you. Maybe every connection, every coincidence, every moment that felt strangely meaningful was guiding you toward this realization. The chapter you thought was approaching has already begun. If you've made it this far, take a moment and think about everything we've explored together. The strange patterns, the uncertainty, the shifting relationships, the recurring symbols, the feeling that life has been speaking in a language you could sense but not fully understand. Seen individually, these experiences may appear random, but together, they form a picture that is difficult to ignore. Perhaps the most important realization is that transformation rarely announces itself in advance. It doesn't wait until everything makes sense. It doesn't arrive with complete clarity. It begins quietly through small shifts in perception, subtle connections, and an increasing awareness that something beneath the surface is changing. Long before you understand the destination, the journey has already started. And maybe that's why this message found you now. Not because you need more information, not because you need another explanation, but because part of you already recognizes what is happening. Something is connecting. Something is reorganizing. Something is asking you to trust what you have been noticing, even if you cannot yet explain it. If the experiences described in this video felt familiar, if you've been seeing these patterns in your own life, then let this be a reminder that you are not imagining them. You are paying attention to something many people overlook. And sometimes, that simple act of noticing becomes the beginning of an entirely new chapter. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing so we can continue exploring these hidden patterns together. If you enjoyed this journey, leave a like so more people who are experiencing these same changes can find it as well. And in the comments, write the word connecting if you feel that pieces of your life have started coming together in ways you can't fully explain yet. Because sometimes the moment everything starts to connect is the moment you realize it never was random in the first place.